Buffalo. The last of the big herds of buffalo had been killed off in this territory in 1881 and 1882. It seems remarkable at first thought that the great herds which grazed over thousands of acres of Montana grasslands in the 70s should be reduced to a few scattered groups of lone specimens by the 80s. But it is not so much a matter of wonder when you are acquainted with the manner of buffalo hunting in the 70s. It was a very profitable commercial affair, and the methods used were most efficient. Take the partnership of Carpenter and Grebson, for instance. They would establish their camp in a thickly populated buffalo country. The partners were the killers, and they would hire a crew of about 12 men as professional skinners. Having established themselves in a buffalo area, the two leaders scouted until they located a herd on a big flat. If the wind was from the east, the killers would work around to the west side of the herd. Equipped with rest sticks, heavy guns, and ammunition, the men would dismount a mile from the buffalo and approach with extreme caution to a point where they might be visible to the animals. From here, perhaps 500 yards, they would crawl on their stomachs to within 150 or 200 yards of the edge of the herd. Here they would set up their rest sticks. These consisted of 2 sticks crossed about 2/3 of the way up and bound together at this point with a buffalo thong. When they set up in the ground, the rest sticks formed a rest for the heavy guns and ensured steady aim. The gun rest was very essential for the steadiest shot when you consider that they often waited a half an hour for the shot they wanted. If you know the habits of buffalo, you understand why the men had to be sure of their shots. If the first failed to kill a buffalo but wounded him, he would start a deafening bellow and start running. That was the cue for the rest of the herd, and they would be off at a gallop, and the hunting for that day would be over. For these experts, there wasn't much danger at the first crack off the barrel, not being a dead shot. If the first shot broke the buffalo's neck or back or pierced his heart, he would fall without a struggle, and other animals at the scent of blood would mill around the dead one in confusion. The rest of the marksman's task was simple. If the herd was a large one, the killers might shoot down 200 animals before the herd was broken up. If the herd consisted of from 25 to 150, the hunters would probably drop them all on the spot in one. When the slaughter was finished, the killers moved on to locate another herd. The paid skinners went to work on the dead herd, and there was no time lost. The only meat used from all this accumulation of flesh was the tongues and humps. The hunting party used the humps, and the tongues were shipped to the eastern markets. The skinners carried a sack of pegs, and after skinning a buffalo, they turned the hide flesh side up in the sun, pegged it down, and allowed it to dry. In a month's hunt, these men would amass 1,000 buffalo hides. The hides were piled on a hay rack and taken to the head camp, which would probably be on the Missouri River, and from here they were shipped down the Missouri and Mississippi to St. Louis or New Orleans and sold at a good profit. The buffalo bones left to bleach on the plains were often gathered sometime later by the breeds of the locality. While we were exploring for a campsite in '84, I was investigating in the 7 Blackfoot area. I came out at the mouth of Hell Creek, where it enters the Missouri, and there on the banks of the Missouri was a solid wall of bones, about 300 feet high, 20 feet wide, and piled as high as bones could be thrown. These bones had been carried to the riverbank by the breeds after the great hunt of '81 and '82. During the years when buffalo hunting was at its height, steamboats came up the Missouri from St. Louis, loaded tons of bones, and carried them back to Mississippi markets. But in 1883, the coming of the railroad into the Missouri River country made it impossible for the steamboats to carry enough tons of bones to compete with the railroads. They had inevitably come to this conclusion without giving the breeds any forewarning. For this great wall of bones, laboriously arranged on the riverbank, was still awaiting the coming of a steamboat from St. Louis. The next year I was passing the mouth of Hell Creek again, and I looked for the wall of bones I had found the preceding year. But the turbulent Missouri had shifted its course. Besides changing the mouth of the creek, the opposite banks of the Missouri had been undermined by the churning waters, and as it caved in, the heap of bones had also been carried away, and the dark waters of the Missouri rushed over the spot where the white wall had stood only a year before. When the Great Northern Railway was built west from Glasgow in 1887, the company located a store at Hinsdale, which at that time was a mile east of the present site. The company bought bones from the breeds and hauled them to the Hinsdale store. Then the company shipped them east. Buffalo bones were used in those days in a clarifying process in eastern sugar factories, but don't let that bother you because the process is as obsolete as the great buffalo herds. This wholesale collection of bones accounts for the fact that there are so few traces of buffalo remains around Hinsdale, a district that was once one of the greatest buffalo hunting areas in Montana. It was in the winter of 1885 when the N-Bar men had a horse camp near Sand Creek on the northern edge of Porcupine Buttes that I ran across W.T. Hornaday, the scientist. He was doing still hunting for the Smithsonian Institute and had established his camp on the southern edge of the Buttes. At this early date, the disappearance of the American buffalo was anticipated, and the Institute had selected this part of the country as the place to find choice specimens. Hornaday made his preparations for mounting at this spot, and some of his specimens proved to be the best collected and are now on exhibit.